Welcome to A Century of Progress, Technology and Diversity in the United States Army. A span of 100 years connected the end of the American Civil War with the deployment of ground troops in the Vietnam War. The technology of weapons was obviously different, but these wars had many similarities. Both were heavily influenced by civil rights movements of their times. Racial attitudes towards African Americans were unchanged from the end of the Civil War, not only in certain parts of the country, but among top leadership within the military as well. Both wars represented technological turning points that changed the nature of American warfare. However, one war successfully integrated new technology, while the other failed to do so. African American soldiers contributed to both conflicts, but by Vietnam, their roles had expanded from rear area soldiers to frontline combat troops. The Civil War was the U.S. military's first experience with an industrial war. Major technical innovations had come to infantry weapons. Rifling and mini-ball ammunition increased accuracy by spinning the bullets, giving modern 1860s rifles a reliable range of up to around 800 yards, a huge improvement over the 75-yard range of earlier smoothbore muskets. Companies like Sharps and Henry were introducing even more advanced mechanisms like repeaters and breech loaders. These new designs allowed faster firing and reloading, and also allowed reloading while prone, something not possible with the large muzzle-loading guns. Unfortunately, the Army failed or was unable to take advantage of this technology. The Union did not have the industry available to equip large numbers of troops with advanced rifles. As it was, for the first 3 years of the war, almost 50% of Union rifles were European imports. Soldiers in the Union Army received little to no marksmanship training. Commanders on both sides of the war, trained in traditional tactics, closed and fired at distances that equaled battles from 50 years earlier during the Napoleonic Wars. These factors completely negated the range advantage of the new rifles and also led to massive casualties. Cavalry flanks, proven to be outdated in Europe already, were heavily favored during the war. General Jackson was famously successful with flanking, but this was mostly due to the ineptitude of the Union commanders he faced. "100 years later, as the Vietnam War unfolds, the Army again has new technology, but this time they capitalize on its advantages. Innovations like night vision, laser-guided munitions, and heavy radio use mark the transition from the World War II era to the electronic age of combat. The helicopter, having seen limited use previously, becomes the workhorse of the war as the Army equips the newly formed air cavalry with them for rapid deployment. 7,000 Hueys alone are used by the Army during the war for troop transport, medical evacuations, supply transport, and more. The massive increase in complex technology required more maintenance and operating personnel, and this manpower need for trained specialists creates opportunities for black soldiers. Desegregation of the military had come well before the Vietnam War, but it was not a smooth transition, and black soldiers were still facing racism and friction by the 1960s. During and after the Second World War, many senior military leaders still felt that black soldiers were not smart enough to lead troops or to operate complex equipment. General Idwal Edwards was one of these people, but despite his personal racism, he argued that maintaining separate, segregated units was inefficient and costly. Trained personnel were being wasted because they could not serve in units that needed their skills. In 1948, President Truman issued Executive Order 9981, which guaranteed the equality of treatment for all persons in the armed forces without regard to race, color, religion, or national origin. In this case, the military was far ahead of civilian social reform, and black soldiers found themselves assigned to bases that were still located in segregated areas. It wouldn't be until the beginning of the Vietnam War that the Civil Rights Act of 1964 finally officially prohibited segregation. For the first time, African American soldiers had the opportunity to choose careers as professional soldiers. The Army offered skilled technical training, something that many men would not have had access to otherwise. Oppressive Jim Crow laws in the South denied black men education and opportunities, and Army enlistment was disproportionately high for African Americans because it offered economic stability and veterans benefits that otherwise would not have been available to them. Extra pay for hazardous duty was considered critical for men supporting a family, and high-risk combat units in Vietnam were composed of almost 50% black volunteers. The Civil and Vietnam Wars are linked in similar themes of groundbreaking technology and diversity, but are separated by how each war dealt differently with each theme. The Civil War misused technology by failing to develop tactics that took advantage of it, and a lack of industry prevented either side from fielding large numbers of advanced weapons. Vietnam, on the other hand, embraced new tactics and technology, like the helicopter and a wide range of specialized weapons. Diversity in the two wars was quite different. In the Civil War, doubts about African American intelligence mean that most of the black regiments are sidelined as garrison troops or laborers who build fortifications. Only 35 out of 137 regiments actually see combat, and all are led by white officers. By Vietnam, 100 years later, though, black officers and career soldiers have been established, and highly visible black soldiers comprise nearly half of combat units.